Not long ago, I came across a fascinating article by a man named Ron Shayak. He's a 71-year-old businessman, entrepreneur, and investor. And 3 decades ago, he developed a ritual that he performs at the beginning of every year that he calls a pre-mortem. Shayak says that he gets away from his everyday routine, he finds a quiet place, clears his mind, and then he says this: I imagine my body old and fragile, my breathing shallow, my energy almost gone. I try to evoke the feelings that I want to have in that moment, a sense of peace, a sense of completion, and most importantly, a sense of self-respect. And then I ask myself, what am I going to do this coming year to ensure that when my death finally does arrive, I've done what I need to do to end up with those feelings of peace, completion, and self-respect? Shayak says that he developed this ritual in response to the death of his parents. He said that his mom died with a great sense of peace and joy, but that his father was racked with remorse and regret about poor decisions he had made and opportunities he had missed. Shayak said that he determined then and there to do his annual pre-mortem in order to ensure that he's on the right track to living a good life now and having a good end then. I really resonated with what Shayak said. And maybe in your own way you do as well. See, I think all of us here in this room this morning at Mission Lakewood, we all want to live a good life now. And when the day finally comes, we want to have a good death then. And so Shayak's ritual of preparing a yearly pre-mortem made me wonder if there are any guidelines that we as Christians can draw to get some help into living our lives well now. And when that day finally comes, dying well then. Well, as I've read the scripture over the years, I think it speaks to that in a variety of places, but perhaps most clearly in Ecclesiastes 11 and 12. At the end of this marvelous and mysterious work, Qoheleth, who I think was actually King Solomon, surveys the nature of his life over many decades of leadership, and he points us all in the direction that we really do want to go. For starters, let's look at chapter 11, verses 7 through 10. Here's what he says: Light is sweet, and it pleases the eye to see the sun. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. But let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. Everything to come is fleeting. You who are young, and many of you in here are young, you who are young, be happy while you're young and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. So then, banish anxiety from your heart and cast troubles off from your body, for youth and vigor are fleeting. Well, in these verses, Solomon provides us with a contrast between light and darkness, between youth and maturity, between following your heart and the necessity of being wise. But friends, his emphasis here is on the fact that everything in life is fleeting. In the end, much of life is like grasping after the wind. I mean, in fact, he says that in verse 8, and then he repeats it for us in verse 10. He's telling us that we can't hold on to the experiences of life, even when they're absolutely great, because they're temporal. They don't last. They're transitory. Little over 30 years ago, my sister, Becky, and I took a trip down to Disney World with her son, my nephew, Mike. And the night we arrived, we were in the hotel room there on the grounds of Disney World. And Becky and I were kind of discussing our strategy about what we were going to do the next 3 days. Were we going to go to Magic Kingdom this way? And then were we going to go to Epcot this day? And then we were going to leave campus and go to SeaWorld this day. And as we were having that discussion, Mike, all of a sudden, who was 9 years old at the time, he says, guys, don't talk about it. If you talk about it, it's going to go too fast. And then 4 nights later, as we were there in the hotel room and we were packing up for the next day, Mike said with tears in his eyes, it went so fast. And he was absolutely right. It just blew by. Friends, given that our lives are fleeting, that life seems to go by so fast that it's like chasing the wind, let's do exactly what Solomon says in these verses. Let's enjoy life now. I mean, 5 times in his great book of Ecclesiastes, he says there's nothing better than to eat and drink and enjoy your work and the wife of your youth. And he is so right. See, I think one of the big temptations that at least some of us face is that we have a tendency to live in the past and evaluate ourselves on the job that we used to have, or the amount of money we used to make, or how we felt when all the kids were still at home. But Solomon comes to you and he comes to me this morning with the experience of wisdom and age and maturity, and he says, don't focus on the past. Don't get emotionally stuck. Don't think about the good old days, but enjoy your life today. Because it's going to go by really, really fast. It's fleeting. I love what writer Terry Pritchard says. Inside every old person is a young person wondering what happened. Well, life happened. So friends, let's enjoy it each and every day. Now, given that, I want to pause here for just a second and ask you a 2-part question. What's one thing that you really, really enjoy? And then can you participate in that this week? See, Solomon comes to you and me in this text, and he says that the very first guideline for living well and dying well is to enjoy your life now. And then he goes on and he builds on that by giving us a second guideline. And this guideline is to make sure that we know that God is the giver of our lives. Look at chapter 12, verse 1, and then we'll scroll down to verse 6. 12:1, he says this. Remember the Creator in the days of your youth before the days of trouble come. And then as we scroll down to verse 6, he says, remember him, that is God, before the silver cord is severed. See, Solomon says here that we'd be wise to keep in mind that God is the author of life and the sustainer of life. And the life that he provides, your life and my life, it's a marvelous, wonderful, wonderful gift. See, we didn't earn it, we can't buy it, and we don't achieve it. It's an invaluable gift. It's something that you and I receive, and it's simply smart to recognize that the Lord is the one who gave it to us. And to make that point and drive it home, he uses the word remember in these verses twice. And in this context, remember means to consciously allow God to shape our perspective on life in the present. See, it's the idea of putting God at the center of life and viewing life through his lens rather than just adding him on to the periphery or letting him have say in this area or that area, but not the center of our lives. Solomon's admonition here is the equivalent to what Jesus meant when he said, seek first the kingdom of God and its righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. About 10 years ago, my wife Melanie and I got invited to this dinner party for donors at Denver Seminary. And one of the couples at that dinner was this couple, Paul and Marge Luan. My wife knew them a little bit, but I really didn't know them very well. Well, at the time, Paul was in his mid-80s and Marge was in her late 70s. And we sat across from them at the dinner, and they were sharing with us about how God had blessed their lives and led in their lives. And they told about the students they had mentored over the years, and they owned a computer business, and they told about all the students they had employed. And they told us about the 2 churches that they had been part of in Denver for over 50 years. And they talked about how God had blessed their family. And later on, I was talking to one of our advancement people who had been in their home, and he told me, he goes, they're really affluent, but they live way below their means so that they can give more and more of their money to the work of the kingdom. And a few months after that, I was teaching a class with a group of pastors and parachurch workers. And my co-teacher was good friends with Paul, so we had Paul Luan come in and teach. And all the pastors and the paraministry leaders loved him. And I went home that night and I told Melanie, I said, I want to be like Paul and Marge. I want to be on their team. As I age, I want to have a heart like theirs, an interest in younger people like theirs, a commitment to each other in Christ like theirs. See, they exemplified enjoying life because they knew that it was a wonderful gift from God. Friends, Solomon comes to us here at the end of his marvelous and mysterious book, Ecclesiastes. And he tells us in these verses that if we want to live well and we want to die well, we should enjoy our lives now because they are a gift from our loving and gracious God. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on, and he says that one of the reasons we should enjoy the life that God's provided for us is because it's temporary. Look again at chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, and then once again, we'll scroll down to 6 and 7 here in just a moment. He says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth before the days of trouble come. And the years approach when you'll say, I find no pleasure in them, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain. When the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they're few, and those looking through the windows grow dim, when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades. Now look at verses 6 and 7. Remember him, that's the Lord. Before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken. Before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Well, in these verses, Solomon is giving us a description of the aging process, especially in the latter stages of life. And to do that, he uses the metaphor of a great house that was once fantastic, but now it's in decline. Its former glories of power and style and hospitality are now contrasted with a few remaining and aging and decaying relics. Friends, we might not like this. I don't like this, but this is a picture of our future, even if we're only 15 years old, because that's what the end of life begins to look like. As that great theologian, Mick Jagger, sang years ago, what a drag it is getting old. Well, Solomon wouldn't disagree. And then he makes that statement about death there in verse 7. He says that our bodies will eventually return to the dust and our spirits will go back to our Creator. See, friends, Solomon comes to you and me this morning and he says, enjoy your life now because it's a gift from God. But remember, it's temporary. At some point in the future, our lives here on earth come to an end. I don't know if any of you in here have ever gone to that website, deathclock.com? Well, if you go to deathclock.com, here's what it does. It asks you to enter the date of your birth and your gender. And then it asks you to enter a few other demographic statistics and some other things about you personally. And then you press this button, and it calculates based on life expectancies, average life expectancy, the exact day you're going to die. But then what's really freaky about it is it shows you the amount of time you have left on planet Earth in seconds. And there's this big clock right in front of you ticking them down. Tick, tick, tick. See, friends, Solomon comes to you and me and he says, enjoy your life now because it's a gift of God. But remember, 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 it's temporary. And then he goes on and he gives us a fourth guideline to living well now and dying well then. And this might be the most important of all. Look what he says in chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. He wraps up his sermon and he says, now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. Well, obviously, these verses here in 13 and 14 follow on the verses we just read up above, verses 1 through 7. And one of the most interesting and fascinating, at least to me, things about that prior section on aging is that it reflects the language of a lot of Old Testament prophets like Isaiah and Amos and Zechariah as they discuss the end times, what the Bible calls the end of the present age. In fact, in his excellent commentary on Ecclesiastes, Old Testament scholar Craig Bartholomew says that all of verses 1 through 14 are a vision of God's cosmic judgment. And that's why it's so important for you and for me to remember our Creator. See, Solomon here at the end of his sermon wants to make it crystal clear that we're accountable to God for how we live our lives. Now, in some circumstances, obviously, that means not doing stuff like not sinning. But in other circumstances, it means doing stuff like enjoying life and giving love to our family and friends and serving others and encouraging those in need and leveraging our resources for the kingdom and Mission Lakewood. It means fulfilling the various duties of our lives with a sense of joy and purpose and expectations because, friends, we are accountable. On May 19th, 1780, a frightening phenomenon occurred in greater New England. There was this dense, impenetrable fog that settled down into the region and it blocked out sunlight. It forced everybody to light candles to see in the daytime. Well, the Governor's Council of Connecticut was in session at the time, and they were discussing some important issues of the local economy as the darkness got thicker and thicker and thicker. Well, one senator stood up and made a motion to adjourn. But wise old Abraham Davenport rose and he said, it's either the day of judgment or it's not. If it's not, there's no need for us to adjourn. If it is, I desire to be found doing my duty. I move that more candles be brought in and that we proceed with our business. And so the council continued in session. Oh, friends, until the day of judgment comes, let's bring in more candles and enjoy our lives as much as we can. I mean, you know this. You know this. We all have tasks to complete and relationships to nurture and jobs to engage. So let's keep to the task. Let's build the relationships. Let's enjoy our lives because they're a precious gift from God. And let's not forget that they're temporary. And we are accountable. I love the book of Ecclesiastes. And if you zoom out and you look at it as a whole, it seems that in some places, Solomon is teaching that nothing matters, that all is vanity, that there's nothing of value under the sun. Well, it is true that as you read the book, he makes statements like that on occasion, because sometimes that is what life looks like and what life feels like and what life sounds like. But one of the things I've appreciated about him is he always eventually processes his way and comes back to God. And so he ends his sermon, he ends his book with an emphasis on accountability. Not because nothing matters, but because everything matters. How we spend our time, how we treat our spouses, how we manage our relationships with our kids and our grandkids, how we do our jobs, how we manage our money, how we love people and how we love God. See, he comes to you and me and he says, enjoy your life now because it's a gift of God. But remember, it's temporary. And you're accountable. Well, given that, can I make a couple of suggestions for us as we continue to walk through life? Suggestion number one, let's continue and be proactive in terms of trying to grow. See, one of the things that we all realize as we get older, and I'm realizing this now because I'm getting older, is it's pretty easy to seek comfort rather than growth. But all living organisms require some disequilibrium if they're going to grow. And that means that you and I have to work at it. So let me encourage us to grow spiritually and grow emotionally and grow intellectually. I have a friend by the name of Tom, and he's now 81. And about 5 years ago, he decided he was going to go back to college and get his undergraduate degree because he eventually wanted to go either into medicine in terms of being a medical tech or a PA. And he's even thinking about, if possible, I might even get into med school, in his mid-80s. So anyway, we were having lunch about 4 or 5 months ago, and we're good friends. And he says, okay, I don't think I'm going to die for quite a while, but when I do, I want you to be my pastor, and I want you to do my memorial service. And I said, sure, fine, that sounds great. Well, along the way, we were talking about life and death, and I mentioned, Tom, you should go on deathclock.com. So he did, and then he sends me an email the next day, and I want to read it to you. He says, by the way, with respect to the death clock, I entered all my data. My fitness program is paying off. The death clock says I'm going to live to 105. And then he goes on and he says, the good news is that you'll have a lot of time to prepare for your comments for my memorial service. The bad news is, Scott, you'll be 95, so you need to stay in good shape for the next 25 years. That's a guy who's committed to enjoying life now because he knows it's a gift from God. He realizes that it is temporary and he's accountable, but he's trying to grow. Suggestion number 2. Let's proactively give. One of the most important books I've read over the last 10 years is a book by a guy named Arthur Brooks, and the title of the book is From Strength to Strength. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. The thesis of his book is this, and it's based on all this scientific research. It's irrefutable. He says that all of us peak around the age of 40, and so as we get into our later 40s and beyond, what we need to do is begin to invest in those coming up behind us. So friends, some of you in here are not yet 40, but you will, and that will be your peak. Some of you here are around 40 or a little bit after that. So you're beginning to move on. Some of you are like me and my good friend Jim Hoover. We're way past 40 now. But what that means for all of us is we need to proactively give. We need to give our time and our energy and promote the success of younger men and women. Let's be quick to give them praise, even if we don't understand what they're doing. Let's be quick to give them help if they ask for it. And friends, for all of us here, let's be quick to give our resources, to meet needs, to build Mission Lakewood, to feed the poor, and to advance the good news of the gospel. Friends, if you and I want to live well and die well, let's be joyful followers of Jesus who are leveraging our lives to grow and to give because our lives are a gift from Him. And they're temporary. And we are accountable.